Welcome to Module 4, Week 4 for Kinesiology 205. This week we're going to take a look at the actions of the upper body. We'll discuss the various movements of the shoulders, the elbows, the wrists, etc. And we're going to find out what the average range of motion is for those joints and how to use a goniometer to measure those ranges of motion. You're going to review the actions of the upper body PowerPoint. You're going to take quiz number 5. And you're going to complete discussion number 5 using your joint comparison. And you're going to complete discussion number 5, joint comparison. All right. So if you click next, it'll take you to the actions of the upper body page. All right, actions of the upper body. Now, again, when I'm going over these PowerPoints, I'm going over them relatively fast and just going over key concepts within the PowerPoint. I really want you to take time and familiarize yourself with the material so you'll be more successful with the quiz, the midterm, and the final, okay? All right, so let's go ahead and get started. Module review overview. In this module, we'll be reviewing the actions of the upper body, and we'll cover the fingers, the thumb, the forearm, the wrist, the elbow, shoulder, and the neck. We're also going to take a look at the goniometry of the upper body. And I know it might be a little challenging, but we'll go over the musculature later on in the semester. I completely understand that the skeletal system, in addition to the joints and the musculature, it all works together, and it might be confusing for you to identify what's going on in the joint without the muscles, but I think it would be a little too overwhelming to go over all those things at one time. All right, so we'll go over that later on. All right, we'll start off with the finger joints, okay? In the quiz and in the midterm and final, we'll talk about different parts of your hand, okay, of your different parts of your finger specifically. So when I refer to a dip, a pip, MCP, CMC joint, so on and so forth, you can find out what that means here. Distal interphalangeal joint is a DIP, is located at the tip of the finger just before the fingernail. So it's the joint furthest out, most distal from your body, okay? The proximal interphalangeal joint, the PIP, is the joint just below that one. So it's this joint here, the middle. The metacarpophalangeal joint, MCP, is where the hand and your finger meet, right here, all right? And the carpometacarpal joint, the CMC joint, is located at the bottom of the hand bone, okay? All right. The metacarpal joint. Carpometacarpal joint is where the hand meets your finger, okay? All right, class. Next is the metacarpophalangeal joint, MCP. This joint is where the hand bone meets the finger bone, okay? Often referred to as your knuckle, okay? These joints are very important. It allows us to bend and flex the fingers in this way, all right? The carpometacarpal joint, the CMC joint, is kind of difficult to see. basically it's where it's right here, right on your wrist, okay, where your wrist bones meet your hand bones right here, okay? So that's where this CMC joint is. All right. So we have finger flexion, okay, finger flexion. And we have different degrees for every joint in our hand. You have your dip, your pip, MP, all right? So flexion is visualize bringing your fingers towards the palm of your hand, okay? Extension is the opposite. It's opening your hand up and bringing your fingers towards the back of the hand. Finger abduction, adduction, and abduction. Adduction, bringing them back together. Abduction, and bringing them apart. Okay, there are your average ranges of motion, degrees of motion there. Finger adduction and abduction. Bringing your fingers back together is adduction, and abduction is bringing them away from each other. Okay. Finger goniometry. Review that on your own. Your thumb, which again is not considered a finger, has so many different movements, and when scientists, physiologists, evolutionary, and your thumb has so many different movements to it. All right, that's why there are many people that refer to your thumb your thumb. Your thumb has a lot of different movements. Okay, it has abduction, okay, moving it away from the body, adduction, moving it away. You probably heard this before, that humans have a opposable thumb. Um, because our thumb is such a great tool, it can allow us to hold on to things, throw things, and craft tools. Okay, so we have abduction, adduction, MP extension, MP flexion. We have IP extension, IP flexion, and we have opposition, okay, which is basically bringing the thumb to the pinky and then opening it back up, okay. Review this slide for thumb goniometry. Next up, we have wrist flexion and extension, okay, and the ranges of motion that correspond with it. Wrist flexion, okay, bringing the hand towards the forearm here, and then extension, bringing the back of the hand towards the forearm. So the palm of the hand towards the forearm here is flexion, and then extension is bringing the back of the hand to the forearm. Radial and ulnar deviation, okay? Radial deviation, this is your radius, and this is your ulnar. So bringing your thumb towards your forearm here is radial deviation, and your ulna, your pinky towards that side of your forearm, is ulnar deviation. Pronation and supination. Neutral would be thought of as a handshake position. Supination, just visualize yourself holding a bowl of soup. And pronation is palms down. Okay. Some wrist goniometry here. All right, now we're going to take a look at the elbow. We have flexion. So if you visualize flexion as a bicep curl, bringing your forearm close to the bicep or shoulder, and extension is opening up that arm. Okay, so if you think about it from a muscular standpoint, If you're familiar with tricep extensions, it's called a tricep extension because it's actually opening up the elbow and straightening it out. The tricep is an extensor muscle, okay? Elbow goniometry here, instructions, and your shoulder joint. Okay, this shoulder joint is an amazing joint. It is has extreme range of motion. Okay, extreme range of motion. Um, the shoulder joint, or often referred to as the glenohumeral joint, the humerus, which is your long bone of the upper arm, which sits into the shoulder joint, is a ball and socket joint between the scapula and the humerus. It is the major joint connecting the upper limb to the trunk. It is one of the most mobile joints in the human body. Okay, and right here, pay attention to it at the cost of joint stability. All right, so your shoulder joint is a ball and socket joint, but it's not a true ball and socket joint like your hip joint is. Okay, your hip joint is encapsulated and your femur is deeply into that ball and socket joint. Okay, so your hip joint kind of looks like that. If this is the socket, this is the head of the femur, it kind of looks like that. Your shoulder joint does not look like that. Okay, if you visualize your shoulder joint here, just a small opening, and there's your humerus. Okay, so you have a lot of mobility in that joint, but you don't have very much stability. Okay, so what is connecting that joint then? What is connecting the humerus to that joint? Well, it's a lot of ligaments, okay, and then there's tendons that are running all around as well. All right, and it's allowing that joint to stay in place. Okay, so you get a lot of range of motion, but it's very unstable. Okay, it's very unstable. Really important when you're doing exercises, you want to pay attention to the range of motion that you're doing in the joint. You have an acromion process that kind of comes out here like this on your joint, and you want to make sure that when you do like a shoulder press, you have a slight angle forward so you can clear that joint here safely without rubbing on those ligaments, without rubbing on those tendons. Typically, if you go straight up in a shoulder press or a lat pull down behind your head, you're really wearing out that joint prematurely. So just be cognizant of that. Some of you might be thinking, well, what about Olympic lifts? Olympic lifts, their arms are way behind their head, and their joints are really, it looks really like lax. But all right, guys, we're going to shoulder flexion. Shoulder flexion, arm comes up. Shoulder extension, arm moves back. 30 degrees of motion there. Shoulder adduction and abduction. Abduction is your arm away from your body, the midline of your body, and shoulder adduction is bringing your arm back. Shoulder horizontal adduction and abduction. All right, so let's go to an abducted position first. Okay, shoulder horizontal abduction. Okay, or excuse me, adduction. All right, let's go to an abducted position first, and then we'll work on your shoulder horizontal adduction, abduction. All right, so I'm adducted, and when I bring my arm to the midline of my body, that's horizontal adduction, adduction. When I move it back out to the side, that's abduction. Class, let's go over shoulder horizontal adduction and abduction. So looking at my arm, okay, from this outstretched adducted. All right, guys, let's look at shoulder horizontal adduction and abduction. Arm is stretched out to the side. When I bring my arm towards the midline of my body, that's horizontal shoulder adduction. When I bring it back out, that's horizontal abduction. Horizontal abduction. Okay. Next up, we have external rotation and internal rotation. All right. So let's do this one with arms by your side. Okay, arms by your side. If you look at your hands right now, let's have your palms facing your body, okay, facing your legs. All right. If I bring my thumb behind me, okay, bringing it towards my body and behind me, that's going to be internal rotation, okay? If I bring my hand, let's talk about shoulder external rotation and internal rotation. For this particular movement, we're going to take a look at what the humerus, the long bone, in the upper arm is doing, okay? So you can see this movement in a lot of different ways. If you take a look at the image A, B, and C, you can look at it that way and see kind of what the humerus is doing in that. Or you can keep your hands by the side of your body with your arms. Guys, we're going to take a look at the shoulder. Let's take a look at shoulder external and internal rotation. You can look at the diagram A, B, and C if that works for you, if that resonates with you. You can also pay attention to what the humerus is doing. Okay, so from this position, okay, I'm looking. Let's take a look at shoulder external and internal rotation. All right. So if you look at diagram A, B, and C, you can take a look at that and see. Let's take a look at shoulder external and internal rotation. If diagram A, B, and C is helpful to you, let that resonate, soak that in. What you're doing is fucking shit, man. All right, class, we're going to take a look at shoulder external and internal rotation. Take a look at diagram A, B, and C and see if that resonates with you. What we're looking at is we're looking at the movement of the humerus in the ball and socket of the glenohumeral or shoulder joint. Okay, so from this position here, I'm going to pay attention to the long bone in my upper arm. Okay, if I bring my hand down, okay, I'm internally rotating that. Okay, if I'm bringing it back up, I'm externally rotating that. All right, you can see that same movement. Okay, if you're in the anatomical position. So from module 1, we understand what that is. Feet are shoulder width apart, shoulder blades back, palms facing forward. Okay, from the anatomical position, I'm looking at my hands, and I'm going to bring my thumb towards my thighs. Okay, that would be internal rotation. If I bring my thumb out away from my body, that would be external rotation. All right, so hopefully that's helpful for you. That particular concept can be confusing. I understand that. Take a look at shoulder goniometry. The shoulder girdle, okay, the shoulder girdle. Understand that the shoulder girdle is composed of the appendicular skeleton connecting with the arms on each side. Okay. Next up, we have the shoulder girdle. The shoulder girdle or pectoral girdle, okay, is a set of bones in the appendicular skeleton, which connects to the arm on each side. In humans, it consists of the clavicle, the scapula. In those species with 3 bones in the shoulder, it consists of the clavicle, scapula, and coracoid. All right. So the shoulder girdle, when we're talking about movements in the shoulder girdle itself, they're going to be different than the flexion, extension, rotation movements, because we're talking about the whole entire girdle moving. Okay, the whole entire girdle moving. So first one, we have elevation. Okay, just visualize and look at my shoulders moving. All right, shoulder girdle elevation. Let's take a look at the shoulder girdle moving. All right, guys, let's take a look at the shoulder girdle movements. Shoulder girdle elevation. Watch my shoulder girdle move. My shoulders go up towards my ears. depression, moving down away from my ears, okay? So that's elevation and depression. Understand that even the shoulder girdle, even though the shoulder girdle is one unit, okay, one part of the shoulder girdle can elevate and the other part can depress. And you see that with a lot of sport-specific movements, okay? Next up, we have protraction and retraction. Protraction and retraction. So moving my shoulder girdle forward would be protraction. And you see my scapula kind of open up back here. And then retraction, okay? Bringing your shoulders back, okay? Protraction and retraction. Next up, we have your neck. So we have flexion, bringing your chin to your chest. We have extension, chin up towards the ceiling or the sky. Okay, we have lateral flexion, bringing ear to shoulder, lateral extension, and we have rotation. Okay, bringing your chin around, looking back behind you, and back behind you. So those are the movements of the neck. All right. Taking a look at neck goniometry here. It's really important to understand, again, that most people do not have equal ranges of motion, or they don't have symmetrical ranges of motion in their body. So you can have flexion, greater flexion on one side than the other side, and that's completely normal. And that's based on activities of daily living, what's going on, what you're doing throughout the day, how you sit. Do you sit with your right leg crossed over your left the whole time? Sport specific. Are you a batter right-handed? Are you an archer left-handed? Those things are going to come into play. Your musculature is going to be stronger, and it's going to pull on your skeletal system more so in those dominant movements. So understand that those dominant movements and those dominant muscles are going to affect the symmetry of your body, and they're going to cause imbalances. So again, it's really important to be able to understand goniometry, to be able to understand testing procedures so you can identify those things. All right, see you next time.